Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Welcome to the Electric Garden, a case study in acoustics and lighting. I'm Teresa Nissen and I'm the Director of Training and Professional Development. And before I introduce the speakers, we'll do the standard housekeeping. Remember, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, which is the icon at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered by the speakers at the end of the presentation. Use the chat function for any technical issues that you have. And also, this session will be recorded and available to you after the conference. Your microphones and your cameras, your microphones will be muted and your cameras will be turned off for the session. And also, this webinar will qualify for continuing education. It gets one learning unit from the AIA, and please submit your requests to me at teresa@iald.org for if you want your credit and or for a certificate. And it may also qualify for the CLD learning units and the LC, which are self-evaluated and self-reported. And if you contact me, I'm happy to send you a certificate of completion for the session. And now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. We have Kate Sweater-Hickox, who is an associate ILD and a passionate and dedicated lighting professional. She's a creative thinker in the field of lighting with over 15 years of experience in both lighting design and lighting research. And she works as a lighting research scientist at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Zachary Bellinger, the founder of the Detroit-based studio Arc Geometer, is driven by the integration of acoustics into architecture. He holds an MS in physics and architectural sciences. In 2013, he was named the inaugural researcher in residence at Impact, where he began development of a new framework for the design and assessment of acoustic architecture.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our presentation today. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be giving you a video tour and some background on the Electric Garden recording studio in Brooklyn, New York. Hi, my name is Kate Sweater-Hickox. I'm a lighting designer, architectural lighting designer, and a lighting researcher, and currently working full-time as a lighting research scientist at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Today, we're going to be talking about Electric Garden Recording Studio, which is a project located in Brooklyn, New York. And Zachary Bellinger and I both worked on this project, and I was hired to work on this project as an architectural lighting designer through my previous company, Dwell Lighting Design.
And my name is Zachary Bellinger, and I'm a consultant in acoustics, sometimes called an acoustician or an acoustic designer. I run my own business called Arc Geometer, where I do research, design, and consultation, primarily to architects, but also sometimes directly to clients and sometimes even to artists. And I got involved in this project because in addition to the lighting, the acoustics are very important, critical for a recording space.
So today we'll be talking about this project on which we both worked, but we also worked with a really interesting team of designers. And so we're going to be introducing you to the team. We're going to be finding out a little bit about their backgrounds, what their vision was for the project, you know, what they think worked, what didn't. And we're going to get a virtual walkthrough tour of the space so that we can virtually together see the final product in action and get a better understanding of how the design process from the original planning to the architectural planning to the interior design to the acoustic design and then finally the lighting design, how it all came together and turned into the recording studio that it is today.
We thought that acoustics was really important in this case to talk about, because not only are recording studios critical acoustic environments, but every decision about a space matters for how it sounds. And you're going to see some of that in this presentation. But if you Google recording studio, you generally get the usual cast of different wall panels and things. The finishes of a room matter a whole lot, but the materiality, the balance of materials, so the reflective, absorptive, diffusive materials, the structure, how much concrete you have, how spaces relate to each other. All of those things have a significant effect on the performance of buildings in general, but in recording studios in particular. So we thought that this was a really nice way to merge acoustics and lighting, because of course, all of those things, everything that you can see in a space matters for lighting as well. But you'll notice in the video that videos we're showing you, really, you can't look anywhere without seeing something that helped determine how the space sounded. In this case, acoustics was kind of split between two people. You have all of the acoustics that you can't really hear, which is really important. So what you can't hear coming from a space next door, or what the neighbors can't hear coming from you, what you can't hear regarding HVAC systems, for example. That sort of noise can get into microphones. All of that was done by Misha Wolf, and he did also help with some of the finished sound portions of it as well. But he was really key to making sure that the space was quiet and that it didn't disturb spaces around him.
I'll start by offering a quick anecdote, because Ben approached me at some point. I was just starting grad school and was trying to get out of acoustics. And so here comes one of my best friends calling. He's building a recording studio, which is very cool. And he's like, hey, Misha, can you help me with a couple of drawings, you know? And I was like, okay, what do you mean a couple of drawings? And he's like, you know, quick project here. Whatever plans he had for the space, and some ideas for what he wanted to do with it. And I was like, Ben, you know, this is like years of work. He's like, no, we're gonna be done in 8 months. It's gonna be fine. I'm like, okay. So of course it ended up being quite extensive. And I think once I got out of grad school 2 years later, we were still doing stuff and went on and on. But the thing that I take away from it, which is I think a testament to just Ben's like sheer power of will, and he's told me essentially as much, is like, had I known what an enormous quagmire this construction project would be, I would have never, ever, ever done it, you know? But he doesn't let himself be concerned with that kind of thing. You know, he's got a vision, and he's got this really, I think, dynamic kind of multifaceted community that he's a part of, and then he pulls into his projects, and then it all seems possible.
The creative community that surrounds Ben, it's hard to miss when you go into the Electric Garden recording studio. It's colorful, it's eclectic, and there's everything from large sculptural elements to murals on the wall. And the architectural designer and interior designer, Missy Ablin, worked really closely with Ben to pull together a team of artists and craftsmen to create all of the elements that you actually see inside the space.
Ben and I entered the working process. He had known me, and my life prior to being an architect was in the arts. And so he had known me more as an artist than necessarily as an architect. And he had come to me asking for a space that felt like a total work of art. And also I was like, yeah, that's achievable, not a problem. And Ben and I would have like very long days where I'd be kind of on the computer, we'd be looking at images, he'd be standing behind me kind of with a design mantra. And we would just be like spitballing ideas. And, you know, those would translate into the look and feel of the space. But then every time we drew a line, it would have to go to Misha or to Zach to think about, you know, what are the acoustic implications of this?
Yeah, and I think that because the process was so idiosyncratic, I think it really enabled the kind of project that came out of it. I think if we followed a more conventional kind of, you know, architect sub, you submit the drawings, you provide revisions, right, rejected, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't know if we could have built what we built. right? I think that kind of close collaboration you're talking about, Mitzi, right? And being so reactive and so, I mean, I remember we would do a series of revisions and iterations sometimes throughout the day, right? Just based on shooting drawings back and forth.
I know like the front wall of the control room changed angles many times. And that had implications for the design that, you know, I don't want to use the word reverberated, but that, you know, changed the design. So the acoustics and the design were in constant conversation through, you know, the shape of the room, through the size of the room, and then through kind of the construction of every wall. So I think we ended up with something like 15 or 16 different wall types in the space, which is just unheard of for any other kind of architecture.
She's not exaggerating when she says that that every line needed to be assessed for its acoustic properties, for its acoustic effect. I think a thing even the experts are still coming to terms with in acoustics is that really shape is the driving factor behind the way that room sounds. And you can include size, volume in shape, but sound doesn't really interact with surfaces in just a absorptive or reflective or diffusive kind of way. There's a lot of subtlety involved in that. And especially in a critical situation, like in the control room of a recording studio, even minor changes to the shape of a surface can make a big difference. And by shape, I mean even down to the fibers and pores of some of the surfaces involved. I don't just mean large gestures. We are talking about everything from the large scale right down to the small scale. The best way, though, to show you would be to let Ben show you the space himself.
Hi, I'm Ben Kane, co-founder of Electric Garden, and we're going to give you a tour of our recording studio today, right here.
Ben, I think, as an owner and as the visionary behind Electric Garden, really played the most important role, realizing his own vision and bringing this entire team together. We always looked to him to make sure we were on track to go where he was going with this vision.
As you can see, it was originally a bean sprout factory.
Throughout the entire studio, from the control room to the live room to all the spaces in between, Electric Garden Recording Studio is filled with art and design.
This is the entrance to our Studio A, main studio. Come on in. I'll tell you a little about this room in a minute, but come into our control room, which is the main hub of this studio. Welcome.
Two of the most important spaces in any recording studio are the control room and the live room. And they are very intimately connected to each other. Generally, the live room is where the music is played and made, and the control room is where it's monitored and where the engineering side happens, the mixing side happens. So for the control room in particular, it needs to be an incredibly neutral environment. And what I mean by that is that they are making decisions about the way that a piece of music sounds, how much low frequency, how much mid, how much high. Sometimes they add reverberation or they add other effects, but they're deciding how that is going to be laid down on the track that's going to be produced and sent out into the world. So in other words, it has to be very flat. It has to be well behaved. It has to be reproducible. They need to know that what they're hearing through the monitors is an accurate representation of what is going to be the final recording.
As Missy mentioned earlier, her background is in art, and so she and Ben at the early stages were pulling in artists and designers to create special pieces and special moments for the space. Custom marbled materials, there's ice dyed fabrics, and there's huge sculptural pieces. And so inside of this control studio, located directly in front of the actual control panel where the audio engineer would be sitting is a massive circular sculpture that's almost like a huge audio wave just emanating out across the wall. And it becomes an acoustic element, a lighting element, and it is a really imposing just overall element in the space.
I actually designed that with, Ben and I kind of together in the process. We had, come up with the idea for this piece. And then we bounced it by Zach and Misha to say like, hey, this is a visual piece, but is there any potential for it to have acoustic properties? If so, is there any way to like strengthen those properties, or what should we be looking at?
For something like the circular sculpture, we really had to be concerned about two different things. One is that because it's made out of a reflective material, wood, that the shape of it, the surface texture, and the overall shape, it's actually kind of like a V in plan, that those would produce good reflection structure in the room. The other thing we had to be concerned about is that there are bass traps behind that sculpture, and they're really, the best way to describe them is that they're wood membranes that are tuned to vibrate at certain frequencies and therefore absorb sound at those frequencies. And we needed to make sure that the sculpture in its large size was not going to impede those frequencies from accessing that. This is one of the places where the very large wavelengths of acoustics are actually beneficial. We can count on sound to actually travel around large objects. As you often experience out in the world, you can hear people around corners and that sort of thing. So in the end, that sculpture is acoustically beneficial, but in that case, we were also just watching carefully to make sure that Missy's vision for it, that she was able to realize that vision while it was either neutral or even helping the space acoustically.
So the circular sculpture from a lighting approach is a really fantastic object to light for multiple reasons. First of all, it's the centerpiece of the room. So it's incredibly dramatic in the space. It really is the first thing that you see when you walk in, and it's in terms of the layout of the room, it's centered directly behind the actual control board where the designer would be sitting and listening to the music and making all the tweaks and changes that they need to do to work with the musicians. And so it's literally what they're staring at all day. And the object itself has a variety of texture types. So it has a lot of small grain texture, which is an excellent kind of surface for lighting because it really picks up any light that's hitting on it, and it doesn't have any kind of glare issues. And then there's more dramatic texture that's CNC carved into the design, which Zach was talking about. There's the acoustic properties of which, it won't harm the space, but visually it really is just an amazing object to graze light across. And so it's a great opportunity to use lighting to kind of create these different dramatic moments. And it also happens to be a light tone, is a light color, so it really picks up the colors of the lighting. So above this circular sculpture, mounted rather close to the wall, is a line of linear lights that's grazing it. And so that the lights are all, for the most part, the lights in the space are highly tunable. So the person who's at the control panel can tune it to whatever color that suits their mood, or whatever color matches the color that the musicians picked in the other room. And that kind of leads into some of the really interesting lighting requirements for the space. So as you can see, it's a really unique kind of space. And so some of the key requirements that Ben was asking for were overall flexibility. So there needed to be a flexibility in terms of changes over time, because this is a 24-hour space. So it needed to be able to accommodate, potentially, if not a real circadian shift, at least a kind of a color temperature indication of what the time of day might be, if that's wanted, or it also needed to accommodate a specific vision that Ben had related to color and how color should be used in the space. So he had been in other spaces where, there'd been a lot of color available, color tuning of lights for artists, and he had a really specific way that he wanted to see that. And so we needed to create a system that allowed for those kinds of changes over time. And then there, of course, there's the mood lighting versus the task lighting. So in a space this dramatic, where you have artists working long hours on creating, a musical vision, you need to support the mood that they're looking for, or that sort of feeling, the energy of the space, as well as providing the specific task lighting requirements that they need to actually see their instruments or see each other's faces to get a sense of what the next change is in the music, or reading music, for instance. So that was one real challenge with the space, was finding places to actually mount the lighting in order to get task lighting in the space, while also mounting lighting for mood, and creating this sort of essence in the space. And then there's a third kind of major challenge that came in, just trying to work the lighting in and around the specific acoustic requirements that had been already developed into the space. So there's in many of the rooms, there's these sort of acoustic clouds that hang above the space that work to modify the noise in the space, either by absorbing or reflecting. And so a lot of the time, the lighting had to be incorporated into these clouds in order to get any kind of light into the middle of the room. So specifically in this scene at the control panel, the task requirements were that the person at the panel needed to be able to change all these little dials without having lots of overlapping shadows. They needed to read very small text for long periods of time, and they needed to be able to change the whole scene and change the mood. And so all of these layers needed to be developed in order to make that happen. But the really fantastic elements in the space, I think, worked well to create these reflective surfaces, so that the person at the control panel has this feeling of brightness, that they can, if they want to have it bright blue at night or bright red at night, or they've been in there for a long time and they feel like they need a color boost, they can change that and it's no problem. And they still have the even dimmable task lighting that they need on the surface, so that they can do their job and do it hopefully in the best mood as possible.
Studio in general, an important aspect of it for us was, of course, to sound good, but also to have a great feeling for those who came in here, as the people who occupy the space are artists and performers, and the energy of the space is very important to them in being able to feel free creatively here. In the back of the room is kind of a lounge couch area where oftentimes the musicians will hang out to listen back to what they just played, and this is a living wall of plants. Yeah, so it was definitely one of the things we wanted here, was to have plants in this space. It's called a living wall, and it definitely gives kind of living feel to the space, which, it's a symbiotic relationship where we feed music to the plants and they give us fresh air. So we have happy plants here. Up above the plants, right now there are 8 hours of daylight, which they require to thrive per day, and we're using LED lights to give them bright light for 8 hours, and for the rest of the day there's more of a dark mood lighting, which can look just like a natural view of the plants, or it can be kind of a crazy thing like blue and red or purple, more of a vibe lighting.
So that was really Ben's vision from the beginning, to have a large presence of living plants, which in a space without any windows and that needs to be acoustically silent, the way to keep something like that alive was really a big question. So working kind of and Ben didn't want to be having to water this living wall on a regular basis, to have to remember that, and to have the risk of water kind of damaging the equipment in the space. So there were a lot of questions around like how that maintenance happens. And so that had to be integrated into the design, both physically and acoustically.
The recording studio has no windows in the space, so there's no natural daylight or biological cues for either plants or humans inside the space, to let them know if it's daytime, nighttime, or if it's the second or third day that they've been in there working. So this is probably a really great thing for musicians who want to just get in and really focus and create, their art in a space and not be interrupted by the normal rhythms of the day. But for plants, and for humans, but for plants, they need to have a cycle. They're not necessarily, they're more creating the mood. They're not, influenced by the mood. So we approached the idea of the plant wall with the concept that we really needed to keep these plants alive and promote some kind of a biological cycle for them. So again, as in with everything in this project, there were a lot of challenges because of the multiple constraints on the space. So Missy alluded to some of that, talking about the maintenance challenges for the plants, but just in terms of lighting, these plants are located inside of the control room, which might be used for 3 days in a row and then might not be used for 3 days in a row. So creating a natural cycle for these plants is difficult and sort of unlikely to be followed consistently. And I think Ben mentions that they have their daylight setting, but often they would change that if there's someone working in space because it can be very intense. But as a basis for design, the idea was to provide the plants with the kind of the toolbox, the lighting toolbox that they need in order to survive. So the system is, again, flexible, it's dimmable and tunable, and it has, and it's an RGB system so that it can be tuned to give the plants the range of spectral power distribution that they need in order to grow. But then it can be alternately tuned to, provide a mood in the space, as it needs to suit the artist. So after completing this project, I recently had the opportunity to work with a group of designers who specialize in research on plant walls. And I found out through those conversations that for the most part, plant walls are designed to be changed out seasonally. So there's this sort of a assumption that the plants are just going to be, recycled and turned into new plants. But we didn't have that approach. And we were really hoping that we could create a long-lasting plant wall. And the plants that are there now are the plants that started out in the space, and they're actually surprisingly very healthy and really thriving in that environment. So that's, somebody did something right, and I don't know if it's the music or what, but they're actually, it's a very happy plant wall.
Most control rooms, most recording studio control rooms, you often see a shaped hard surface at the back, a diffuser. The point of a diffuser is really just to scatter sound. It's kind of like having a frosted piece of glass. to not absorb it, but to not give a coherent reflection like you might get from a hard flat surface. And those plants perform that role in this. Usually the products that are used on the rear wall are highly engineered to scatter sound. We took a bit of a chance on this one. We think this is yet again something that I think is not as well understood in acoustics as we'd like. Plants have shape, they have depth, they have a variety of scales, and they sit in dirt, which has depth and a porosity. So it absolutely has an influence on the space, and we're able to get the sound that we like. And I like, for consistency's sake, that plant wall doesn't change year in and year out. It may get slightly bigger and healthier, but I think that kind of change we can handle acoustically.
So now let's take a look into the live room here. I'll show you that in a second. You'll see that these two rooms are on two different heights, and that's how the building was when we got here. This room that I'm standing in was actually the room that bean sprouts were grown in. There was a skylight which we covered up to stop outside noise from coming in, and this was like an office area, and I think there was a couple windows where you could look down on the bean sprout area, but it was a much different kind of space. But the two levels are how the building was when we found it, and we kind of adapted it to work like this. So come along and I'll show you that room.
You'll notice that when he steps into the little hall and then he steps into the live room, you can actually hear the change in the acoustics.
First, this room, which is the room that we walked through when we came up the stairs, it works as a hallway, as you saw, but it's also a vocal booth, where just another kind of recording space where, say, a singer can be separated from other musicians out in that room, and there's the window here to see back and forth. Yeah, so check out the floor too, which was marbled in this design. It's wood that has this painting on it, and it was done by the great artist named Danny Ebrew. Okay, come on in. All right, so this is the live room, the room where musicians are typically recording their parts. Right now it's kind of set up for just a couple musicians, but often there'll be a drum set in here and different kind of stations for a bass player and a guitar player. Some of those are kind of around the room, but this is kind of the cleaner version than when there's a group of 5 musicians here. But setting up the space, it's meant to work for a few different things, from just having a single vocalist out here to having, a choir or a full band with horns and a drummer and different things. And it's not a huge room, so making it function like that took a bit of work. Again, with this room, the kind of energy and the feeling and the vibe was a super important part of the design.
The live room is a very different space from the control room, because remember, the control room is all about neutrality. Actually, the control room, the frequency response has to be flat. You might have noticed there was a bilateral symmetry to the control room. Low frequency control is really important, which is why we had the bass traps at the front of the room. This room is different. Of course, we still want a balanced sound, but a live room is where the music itself is played. And when you see this room and you look at it, don't don't focus too much on just the sound absorption. Notice that there's a balance of materials. There's sound absorption, there's sound diffusion, and there are even reflective surfaces. Blank walls are not walls without acoustics. Blank walls are reflective acoustic walls that we use very intentionally in a space like this. In particular, live rooms sometimes want a lot of reverberation, and reverberation depends not only on the balance of materials in the space, but also on the size of the room. Because of the site conditions, we were limited in how large we could make this space. So we needed to get creative about how to get that big sound when he wanted it, but to reel it in when he didn't want it. And that led to some things like the soft corner, which is a very small part of the space with a localized acoustic environment. And it led to things like the bark on the walls, which is a nice diffusive surface. And it led to things like carefully placed hard reflective surfaces.
We wanted to kind of feel like you're in a little world here. So it serves a couple purposes. One, creating a different space within the room feel-wise. You can kind of come in here and, you know, if you're a singer, maybe you now feel like you're in an isolated little space, you know, cosmic world here. And also acoustically, it is a different sounding area than the rest of the room, which is very reflective. In here, there's curtains, which can open and close to kind of alter the sound of the space. So you can get a real acoustically dead sound in here by closing in the curtains. And you can also isolate to some degree. These are soundproofed curtains with a lot of thickness, and you can isolate one instrument or musician to some degree from what's going on outside the space. And you know, everything's picked up by microphones, so there's several techniques, but definitely in creating the opportunity to close off this space is one of the techniques we use to record multiple things and still have some isolation between them, and also to have a different sound aesthetic of what's going on in here than if you place the same, say, drum set in here, you'd get a very dry sound, and if you place the same drum set out here, you get a much more reverberant sound, just because it doesn't have all of that absorption around it. And creating the different sounds in the space was something we wanted to do. As we go around, here's more tree bark. Yeah, and then this is the view back. Here's a little vocal recording setup for the session that's happening today. And you can see they're able to look down at the engineer or producer in the room below and have visual eye contact between the two rooms. So now I'm going to show you this wall. This is another kind of CNC'd piece, more simple than the last one, but also designed by Missy Ablin. And the door is included in this design. And as you can see here, sometimes you'll have a musician on the other side of this glass who you're also communicating with. So you have these different spaces that work together.
Acoustics and lighting are very different in a lot of ways. It's primarily an issue of scale and speed. Sound is way larger. It has wavelengths of a few centimeters to about 17 meters. That's audible sound. It's way slower. We think of sound as being fast. In the acoustics world, it's 343-ish meters per second. Far slower, of course, than light. So there are different challenges with that. But there are some parallels, too, that I think are really valuable, that allow acoustics to learn from lighting. The main one is that it's pretty understood that the way light works, you supply light to a space in any number of ways or combination of ways, and that the look of the space is the result of the way that that light interacts with everything. And that's why everything matters visually. Sound works in the same way, even if it's a different scale, a different speed. You supply sound to a space. In this case, it's a musician or it's a monitor in the control room. And that sound fills the space and it interacts with everything. And so a recording studio like this is just a really unique opportunity, I think, to learn from each other, because every decision matters visually, every decision matters for the lighting designer, and every decision matters sonically as well. I find those to be the most inspiring projects to work on.
As you've heard from all of the interviews with Missy Ablin, the architect interior designer, Misha Wolf, who worked on many aspects of the acoustics, and from Zach and myself, and even from Ben during the tour, this project was really, you know, a labor of love and a group of artists coming together to try to create the vision of the building owner, and that vision included creating a space that had very specific acoustic and lighting requirements, but also a space that created the specific mood or feeling or moment that any artist would want to create around themselves. So an ultimately flexible space in terms of the opportunities for how you can feel and what you can create inside. And so in order to do that, the team had to come up with many unique and innovative lighting and acoustic solutions that were sometimes new, sometimes very common, but done in new ways, and sometimes done in the common way, but just in a new color. So today's tour was the control room and the live room of Studio A, which is upstairs in this space. There's also a lower level to the space that is open for the artists. And so that includes a lounge where the musicians can spend time in between takes or when they just need to relax. There's bathrooms, kitchenette areas. And there's also another set of studios, Studio B. So there's another control room and another live room downstairs. And so the last part of this tour is downstairs at Electric Garden in the Studio B live booth. And so this is a small acoustically separated booth inside of the live room. So it's a place, a vocal booth, a place where a singer might go in order to sing and be isolated from the musicians that are playing in that space. And we just think that this very cozy space is a great example that just shows how the final result weaves together all these varied disciplines into one very, you know, mood-driven space. So I think you'll see for yourselves why we wanted to end here. And thank you so much for listening to this presentation today.
And then here, there's actually 2 rooms within this one booth, similar to the vocal booth we had upstairs. And you can have a musician in this space and another musician in this space. And this is often used as a vocal recording booth. It's completely covered in fuzzy blue shag carpet. And it's a very dead sound in here, just to kind of capture the singer, and no reflections or resonances that we didn't want. And I think it's another kind of atmospheric thing where it's just nice to hang out and rub on a carpeted room. So just more of a feels nice type of thing in here. And yeah, and a cool look. And yeah, and the glass doors between the 2 spaces to isolate them. I think that will conclude the tour. yeah, thanks so much for walking around with me.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. And now if Zachary and Kate can turn on their mics and their cameras, I've got a bunch of questions for you here. So I will just throw them out and one of you can respond to them. Do you have a programming platform that operates off an Astro clock with show overlays? Timeline-based DMX controls platform? Question.
Yes, so I think I saw this question go up in the chat during the part about the plant wall.
Yes.
But I think that in general, I can answer that. For the lighting, about half of the lighting is on a Variac type wall dimmer, so manual. That kind of goes for all the task lighting. And then most of the mood lighting, anything that is really flexible, that incorporates color or color, tuning in the space that the person at the control panel or the artist might have access to, is all DMX based. And so at the beginning of the project, we had a lot of ideas about creating a lot of different scenes and shows. And in the end, I think that the way that they end up using it for the most part is manually, and that, the artists come into the space and they might start out with a kind of a scene, but the artists are able to control the color and the brightness level inside the space. And so they do that all manually through that DMX panel. And for the plant wall, there is a DMX show. And that's how we set it up. So I can't say for certain how they're actually using it right now, but that was the idea, was that there was a DMX show that would put up lighting for 8 hours on the plants. And then we had specified that it would be great to have a dark period as well, and so that should be programmed in there. But you can see from the video that the space is used in a really it's really variable how the space is used. And so I think that probably gets overridden a good deal of the time when they're in there, want to set a different mood. But yeah, I mean, surprisingly, the plants are really surviving and look really great. So it seems to be working, even though it's pretty variable.
Great. And what were the acoustic considerations necessary in selecting the lighting and control systems from an electromechanical perspective?
Okay, so I'm not an expert in this area, and Zach might want to jump in and correct what I'm about to say. But from what I understand, this is the first recording studio that I've done that has these really specific requirements. So from what I understand, you can have, it's very easy for the sound equipment to pick up a buzz or a hum from the space when you have, that could come from wires running through the space, or it could come from a solid state type dimmer that has, that's putting out a frequency that the sound equipment could pick up. So the kind of the basic solution for that, and that's what we did for all of the dimmable lighting that's task lighting that didn't go on a DMX system, is that we used a variable power transformer, so a Variac panel. And you can see it in the video in one of the scenes where he's talking about the plant wall. There's a giant box on the wall that has all of the dimmers on it. And so that's how they manually dim and turn on and off a lot of the task lighting, because that doesn't create that same hum or buzz. And then for the DMX system, we worked with Misha and Zach. I think you had something to do with that too, that looking for locations to mount control elements so that they were behind other solid walls or solid elements in the space, so that it would create less hum. And there was a lot of care taken into how the wires were run through the space. Zach, I don't know if you want to throw anything in
No, that's great. I don't have anything to add.
there. Okay.
Okay. Someone asked, did you go through many mock-ups for this project for both the sound and the lighting combined? If yes, where did the mock-ups take place?
I could start with that one. Yeah, acoustically, it's always really nice to do mock-ups because if you can hear the effect of something before you invest in it in a permanent sense, then it's a great option. We did them where we needed to, and they happened in the space themselves. Recording studios really are a different type of project, not only because they're so critical acoustically, but because the ears of the people you're working with, I mean, Ben is a far more discerning listener than I am. Even my understanding of acoustics in buildings comes down to materials and shape and things. His understanding of it comes down to what his ears tell him. So there was a lot of back and forth. When you design an important space like that acoustically, you try to get, say, 90% of the way there with good principles and decisions along the way. And you leave room at the end to do that final 10%. Ben and I are still spending time on the phone here and there where he will hear something and we will chase it down and he'll do a little mock-up and then he'll make it permanent. You have to, of course, get 90% of the way there because there's only so many changes you can make after the fact. But I think those mock-ups are really critical in that we try to explore. If we, let's say, hear something, we want to change the way that it sounds, we'll try to do something temporary or even something a little extreme to the space to see if that actually pushes it in the right direction and then back it off into something that can work permanently. But it's been a critical part of the process.
Yeah, and for the lighting, we don't have a lot of time, so I'll just say quickly that the when I got brought in on the project, it was later in the project, so it's a retrofit space, so a lot of the architecture was already set, but a lot of the elements, acoustic elements, like the bark wall, for instance, were in process by the time I was brought into the project. So we just did a lot in the space. There was a lot, and Ben is very hands-on, and so there was just a lot of time spent in the space. Actually just holding up lights and measuring a distance, and then setting up the space while testing it at the same time. So yeah, we had an opportunity to see a lot of it, as it was coming together.
Great. So there are two different acoustic designs for the control room and the live room. Have you designed the lights in two different ways as well? And if so, what's the connection?
So the difference between the control room and the live room acoustically is much more different than the difference between the live room and the control room from a lighting perspective. So I tried to keep them tied together in that, the controls for the spaces are accessible from both locations, and it's Ben had a concept about the color that he didn't want it to be sort of looking very circusy. And so we wanted to try to keep, sort of the same color across whole surfaces, for instance. So if the ceiling's going to be all green, it's going to be all green, but they're able to tune these kind of large surfaces to different colors or different brightnesses depending on what kind of mood they're trying to set. So no, the approach is pretty similar in those spaces. It was about a lot of the time grazing the really interesting kind of small textures that were on the wall, like the bark surface or the circular sculpture in the control room, and then providing opportunities to have these color fields that could be modified. And then using there's these kind of acoustic clouds that are on the ceiling. So one lighting acoustic challenge is that per Misha's design, a lot of the surfaces couldn't be punctured, so you couldn't have a recessed fixture, for instance. And there's acoustic elements that are included in the ceilings and on the walls. And so in a lot of cases, you can't break those elements or break those surfaces. So so finding ways to kind of hide the lighting inside these elements or work with those elements was challenging, but was, you know, similar between the two spaces.
So we've mentioned the wood wall. Is it real bark or is it faux bark?
It's real.
Is
No,
real?
it's real. It's poplar.
Great. Okay, and then another one, many architectural luminaires are promoting noise reduction coefficient values. Was NRC a variable in your design?
It was, I would say indirectly, yeah. NRC is it's an average of the absorptive performance of a surface. That average is taken over the range of the human voice. But of course, the sounds we can hear cover a much larger range than that. The sound, the frequencies that comprise music is a much larger range than that. So we absolutely take into account the absorptive properties of every surface, but we do it at a deeper level than NRC. We go right into the frequencies themselves and look at the behavior across the entire audible spectrum.
Okay, great. Zachary, one last question for you. Was there anything that you felt the acoustics could not achieve on account of the lighting design?
No, I don't think so. I think the ability to work closely with someone who, like Kate, who is an expert in her field, but also knows a lot about acoustics and it respects the acoustics world quite a lot, is really helpful in that. The main issues we run into in acoustics with lighting have to do with the noise that the systems make. As Kate mentioned, that's really important, making sure microphones don't pick up that sort of thing. But we were able to solve all of those problems.
Great. And one last question for you, Kate, and then we'll have to end because the next session will start. Is there anything you would have done differently if you had been brought onto the project much earlier than you were?
Yeah, I think that I think there could have been a smoother integration between a lot of the elements and the luminaires, just because of these acoustic issues and the sound that comes from the dimmer, from the wiring, or from the luminaire itself. I think that, you know, of course, you know, you want to be brought in as early as you can on the project so that you can, you know, you can be trying to deal with some of those elements that you're not thinking of immediately, like how do we actually run the wires here in the ceiling if we can't break the ceiling surface, and just, yeah, sort of some pre-planning concepts I think would have gone a long way, but because it was such a integrated team, we were able to deal with all of those issues in a way that I think was successful.
Well, it's an amazing project and we really enjoyed watching your presentation. Thank you very much for speaking. And I think this will end our session as we head into the next one and come on into the next session to catch up and connect with old friends and make new ones. So thank you, Zachary and Kate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.